Okay, Unit 11, Day 4, homework prep. I asked you guys to put zero product property up in the top left-hand corner. You'll notice I wrote A times B equals 0. Remember that a product deals with multiplication, and if it's a zero product, that means you're multiplying to get 0. So if you guys write down A times B equals 0 for me, please do. I'll ask you guys, well, what does that tell you about A and B? And what you guys should tell me is that in order for this to be true, is that either A has to be 0, or B has to be 0, or both have to be 0. Okay? In other words, one of those guys has to be 0, or both of them has to be 0. Now, this little piece of logic here we're going to use quite a bit as we begin to factor these quadratic equations. Over in the top right-hand corner, I asked you guys to write down the word factor. There's going to be two rules we're going to use, or two little items in our checklist here when you're factoring these. The first thing I always want you guys to look for is look for a GCF, and if you guys see one, I want you guys to factor it out. After that, as you look at what's left over, if an x squared or a quadratic remains, then I want you guys to factor it by grouping. Okay, make sure you guys have this copy down. Go down here to your bottom two problems. Take a look at your rectangles. I asked you guys to draw these rectangles or these stitches before you guys left class. I want you guys to fill them in with what it says here. Set equation equal to 0, factor, and set factors equal to 0. Notice the two problems we have here on the left and the right. Let's attack the problem on the left. On the left, we want to set this equation equal to 0. So the first thing that I would do is add 4x to each side. Now when I do, I'm going to get x squared plus 4x is equal to 0. All right, so we've set it equal to 0. Now on day 3, we talked about once we have this set equal to 0, we could go to the calculator and we could graph this and see what it looks like. Well, here's x squared plus 4x. It's in the calculator. If I graph it, what I get is this. And according to the graph, the two solutions that we should be getting here are -4 and 0. Okay, so let's see if that's what we get if we follow the instructions the rest of the way. After we set it equal to 0, we want to factor. Okay, and as we look at this expression, we first want to look for a GCF. We want to look and see whether they share anything. Well, these two factors, or these two terms actually do share something. They share an x. So I'm going to factor that x out of each one of the terms. So I'll divide it away. And what I end up getting left over in the parentheses is x plus 4. Now that x plus 4 is not a quadratic. It's not an x squared. So what this is telling me is that I am done factoring. Okay? Now what I need to do is I need to use the zero product property. Remember, the zero product property tells us right up here that if you have two things that multiply together and they equal 0, that either one of them or both of them are equal to 0. Well, since we're looking for all the possible solutions to our equation, we're going to assume that both of these two things are equal to 0. So if I have x times x plus 4 equals to 0, that's a product. And we set each one of these factors, set the x equal to 0 and set the x plus 4 equal to 0. Okay? And what we do is we just take a moment to solve for x. And what we should be getting is the same solutions we should be getting with graphing. First one says x is equal to 0. Well, that's already solved. So x could be equal to 0. The second one is just a one-stepper. We'll subtract away that 4 to get the x by itself. And x is equal to -4. Now notice as we look back at our graph, that's exactly the same thing we would get from graphing. Okay? On the other side, x squared equals 2x. Let's set this equation equal to 0. I would do that by subtracting 2x from both sides. I get x squared minus 2x is equal to 0. The x squared minus 2x here, when it comes time to factoring, they do share an x, so I'm going to factor out the x. When I do, what's left over is x minus 2. Notice that the x minus 2 is not a quadratic, so that means we're done factoring. This expression, or this is completely factored. And notice we have a zero product here. We have x times x minus 2, which means we can set each one of them equal to 0 to find all of our possible solutions. So the first one, x is equal to 0. There's one of our solutions. The second one, we just add the 2 away. And we get an x equal to 2. Now just to show you that this is the correct answer, if we go back and look at the graph of x squared minus 2x, we go ahead and graph that guy, you'll see that it's going to cross the x-axis at 0 and 2, which verifies that our answer is correct. Okay, so pretty good. All right, flip over to the back side. Once again, go ahead and label your rectangles, label your stitches, do it on both of these problems here. And copy down the one on the left, x squared minus 5x equals 14. Let's set this equation equal to 0. And I would do so by subtracting the 14 from both sides. I end up with x squared minus 5x minus 14. Okay, that is set equal to 0. Now before we keep going, let's just take a little sneak peek. Let's take a look at our calculator, and let's see what the answer should be. Okay, so we got x squared minus 5x minus 14. We graph it. It's telling us that our answer should be, according to our roots here, -2 and count over 4, 5, 6, 7. So -2 and 7 should be our answers. Let's see if that's true. So as we begin to factor, take a look at x squared minus 5x minus 14. Remember, our first rule up here says we should look for and factor out a GCF. Well, as we look at this particular expression here, x squared minus 5x minus 14 don't share any common factors other than 1. So a GCF is not going to be able to be taken out. But it can still be factored. This is a quadratic, which means we're going to factor it by grouping. Okay, well, the first thing we need to do is do a little riddle. A times C, 1 times -14 is -14. Those same two numbers need to add to give you the one that's in the middle, the -5. And I'll let you guys in on a little secret, which many of you guys have already figured out. When the A on the quadratic is 1, these numbers that you're finding in the riddle are always going to be the numbers that end up going in your binomial factors. So here's what I'll say. From here on out, if the A is equal to 1, all you have to do is figure out the numbers that go in your riddle, and you can write your binomial factors from them. So for instance, two numbers that multiply to be -14 and add to be -5 are -7 and 2. Well, I'm going to allow you now to just go ahead and write your binomial factors. Write it in a -7, write it in a +2, and you are now factored. So you get to skip the grouping part. Okay? We'll define our final answers for the solution of the equation. We got to set our factors equal to 0. Notice we have a 0 product here. We have two things that are multiplying to equal to 0. We have x minus 7, and we have x plus 2. Well, let's set each one of those guys equal to 0 to find all possible solutions. So x minus 7 is equal to 0. X plus 2 is equal to 0. Subtract away that 7. We get is x is equal to -7. Here we'll subtract away the 2. Oh, we should have added that 7. Oops. We'll subtract away our 2 to get -2, and we end up with a +7, my bad, and a -2. So as we go to our calculator, that does match up. We get a +7 and a -2. That is our answers. Okay, one on the right. X squared minus 12 equals -x. Let's set our equation equal to 0. So add your x to both sides. Notice I'm putting it in its hierarchy here. X squared, then x to the first, then the one that doesn't have any x's. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a little sneak peek here. Let's see what our answer should be. So x squared plus x minus 12 should yield us answers of -4 and +3. So let's see if that's true. Okay. Notice that there is no GCF with x squared plus x minus 12. And so we're going to do a little riddle here. And since the A here is just 1, we're not going to have to do any grouping. Okay, so 1 times -12 is -12. And then we're going to add together to get 1, x in the middle. So the two numbers that will work here will be 4 and -3, which means we can go ahead and write our binomial factors as x plus 4 and x minus 3. Okay. There's our 0 product. Let's set each one of these factors equal to 0. So x plus 4 is equal to 0. X minus 3 is equal to 0. Quick little one-steppers. Is x is equal to -4. And x is equal to 3. Quick little glance back at our calculator. -4 and 3 is what we needed. We're feeling pretty good. All right, last two problems. Negative x squared equals -12x plus 36. Let's add that x squared to both sides. I'm going to make sure I put it in the correct order. So I'll do the x squared first, then the x term, then the one that doesn't have an x. Okay. I'm also going to take a little sneak peek at my calculator here and see what the answer should be. Okay, let's see, x squared minus 12x plus 36. Let's go ahead and graph it. And this looks like one of those guys that goes and sits down right on top of the x-axis. And it looks like the answer or solution should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6. It's kind of hard to tell. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my table. And you'll notice here that where x equals equal to 6, y equals to 0. So that's letting me know that x is one of our solutions. Okay, so let's see if we get 6. There is no GCF here other than 1. So it's time to factor. Our A is 1, so all we're going to need to do is just our riddle. So 1 times 36 is 36. Those same two guys need to add to give us negative 12. And if you think about that for a little while, the only ones that are going to work are going to be negative 6 and 6. Negative 6, excuse me. So writing that as the binomials, I'll get x minus 6 and x minus 6. Okay. Well, zero product. Let's set each one of the factors equal to 0. But you guys will quickly notice, if I set each one of these x minus 6s equal to 0, well, that's going to be redundant. They're going to give me the same answer. So if they repeat, all you have to do is just do it once. So add away your 6, and x is equal to 6. Well, lo and behold, that's what we got from our calculator. Pretty cool. All right. Last problem here, 6x squared minus 11x minus 10. We want to set it equal to 0. Well, it's already set equal to 0, so check. Let's go ahead and take a sneak peek at what this guy's going to look like in the calculator. Okay, so let's see. Okay, 6x squared minus 11x minus 10. When I graph it, it's going to come down and it's going to touch, well, it doesn't touch anything exactly. It looks like it's somewhere in between 0 and negative 1 and somewhere in between 2 and 3. So this is one of those ones where we're going to end up with fractions or decimals. No sweat, we can handle this. All right, let's see what we get. You'll notice here when it comes time to factor, there is no GCF. One change here is that the A value is not 1, it's a 6, which this is going to require us to do the entire grouping. Get excited. Okay, so our riddle goes, let's see, 6 times negative 10 is negative 60. Those same two numbers need to add to give you negative 11. So if you think about that for a moment, you should come to the conclusion that these are the numbers that work. Remember that these are not the numbers we're going to throw in our binomials because the A is not equal to 1. What this is these are the two numbers that our middle term will split up into. Okay. All right, so let's see here. Now we got it so that the grouping will work. We got two groups. Take a look at the first group, 6x squared minus 15x. They both share a 3 and an x, so that's what I'm going to factor out of that. And when I do, I'll get a 2x and a minus 5. And then I take a look at the second group, 4x minus 10. They both share a 2, so I'll take out a positive 2. When I divide away that 2, I get 2x and minus 5, and that's good because those guys both match up. My final factorization will look like 3x plus 2 times 2x minus 5, and that equals 0. And that expression is now completely factored. We got ourselves a zero product here. We got two things that multiplied equals 0, so we'll set each one of those equal to 0. So 3x plus 2 is equal to 0, and 2x minus 5 is equal to 0. Well, you can see at first glance that these are not going to be one-steppers. That's okay. You'll also notice that these guys are not going to give us whole numbers or integers. Excuse me, whole numbers or fractions. Sorry, they're going to give us fractions. So the first one is negative 2/3. Okay, well, if you look back at your graph, you'll notice that we had one of these zeros that was in between 0 and 1. Right? Well, that takes care of that. Okay. Let's take a look at the other one. 2x minus 5, let's add away the 5. And then divide away the 2. And when we do, we get x is equal to 5 halves. 5 halves is 2.5. Okay, we go over here. Boom, that's right where the other 0 is. We're feeling pretty good. Okay. When you guys come into class next time, we'll work a little bit more on graphing. And we're also going to work a lot more on these factors, solving the quadratic equations by factoring. All right, thank you very much.